Live from London, this is BBC News. Disaster in the North Sea. An oil tanker is on fire after a major collision with a container ship off the coast of Hull. More than 30 survivors have been brought ashore in Grimsby. There are fears of a major oil spill just 20 kilometres off the East Yorkshire coast. The former governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, wins the race to become Canada's next Prime Minister. And the gloves are off, he says, in the trade war with Donald Trump.
My government will keep our tariffs on until the Americans show us respect.
The White House says it expects substantial progress in talks with Ukraine that begin tomorrow in Saudi Arabia. Ukraine's top commanders say a Russian advance in Kursk has been brought under control. And the meat, dairy and sugar that is grown in a lab, which could all be on sale soon in UK supermarkets. A very warm welcome to Verified Live. A major rescue operation is taking place currently in the North Sea after an oil tanker and a cargo vessel collided this morning off the coast of Hull. These are the pictures that were sent to the BBC. They show thick black smoke billowing from both ships. The American flagged tanker there on the horizon is the Stena Immaculate. On the tracking side, it was seemingly at anchor outside Hull when it was hit by the Salong, a Portuguese flagged container ship that was heading south from the Scottish port of Grangemouth towards Rotterdam in the Netherlands. The chief executive of the port of Grimsby East was told there was a massive fireball after the collision. Crowley, the logistics firm which is the operator of the Stena Immaculate, has confirmed all people on board the vessel are accounted for. It also said the tanker was carrying jet fuel when it was hit, and there are growing fears that that fuel will now begin pouring into the North Sea. Lifeboats and firefighting teams were dispatched quickly on the scene. More than 30 casualties have so far been brought ashore at Grimsby. The Coast Guard rescue helicopter was scrambled from Humberside alongside the lifeboats from Skegness, Bridlington, Maplethorpe and Cleethorpes. This is the map of the location. The collision site is around 20 kilometres off the coast there. But if we switch to this map from marine traffic, you'll see that at the time there were a lot of ships in that area, as you'd fully expect outside the Humber estuary. And a lot of that shipping would have been waiting at anchor to go into the container port in Hull. So an obvious question is, why was more care not being taken? We've been hearing from our reporter Phil McCann, who was able to tell us a bit more about the two ships.
We have actually in the last few moments had an update from the US logistics firm Crowley. That is the operator and also the joint owner of the MV Stena Immaculate. That's the oil tanker here. And it says that it was carrying jet fuel when it was hit by the container ship Salong in the North Sea this morning. So not crude oil, but jet fuel. The hope, of course, will be that that is the kind of fuel that can dissipate as opposed to the kind of oil that can cause huge environmental damage, especially on coastlines. Significantly, they've also said that all of the ship's crew of more than 20 are safe and accounted for, but they say jet fuel is pouring into the sea. They've given us a statement which continues, a fire occurred as a result of the collision. Fuel was reported released. The Stena Immaculate crew abandoned the vessel following multiple explosions on board, giving a very dramatic account of what happened. All Crowley mariners are safe, they say, and fully accounted for. Now, the BBC understands that the fuel on board this ship was owned by the US government, which is consistent with the fact that we know that vessel was part of an arrangement with others, a US government arrangement, which is designed to supply the US armed forces with fuel during times of armed conflict or of national emergency. And just to be clear, of course, we know that there are American Air Force bases in several parts of the UK. We don't necessarily know that that was the reason that that ship was delivering fuel at that point in time, but we do know now that it was the US government which owned the fuel on board. As for the other ship involved here, of course, the Salong, we haven't had confirmation yet from its owners or operators as to exactly how many people were on board. We know that it was 32 people who have so far been reported to have been rescued and brought ashore at Grimsby, and also no detail from them as to exactly what happened to cause this collision.
Well, thanks to Phil for that. Our climate and science reporter Esme Stullard has also been taking a look, explaining to us how to secure the cargo on board and the significance of the fuel being jet fuel.
What's very important here is the type of fuel that's on board, and that's because they behave in different ways. So sometimes when we think of oil spills, potentially images of black birds covered in sort of this black oil or the sea covered in it spring to mind. That is crude oil. That's not what we're dealing with here. And that's important because they dissipate differently, as we've just heard. So jet oil, kerosene can evaporate very quickly, which means that it doesn't hang around in the environment for as long. But that's not to say that it doesn't potentially pose harm to the natural environment, and that's because the fumes can be quite toxic. So on a small scale, we're not expecting it to potentially kill fish, but obviously this could be quite a significant spill. And as that enters the water column, it can be toxic to aquatic organisms. There's also concern, obviously, for nearby nature reserves if it was to wash up. And actually, we've had a statement in the last few minutes from the RSPB. I'm just going to read you elements of it here. Dave O'Hara, who's a senior site manager at RSPB Bempton Cliffs, which is a nearby nature reserve, said, as details continue to emerge, our first thoughts are for the safety of everyone on board, but this incident is close to Bempton Cliffs, home to the biggest gannet colony in England. Naturally, we are extremely concerned about the potential of a leak from the tanker. Now, there's obviously been a very quick response, as we've seen from the UK Coast Guard, and they said to us, as part of that response, that we're also looking at a counter-pollution activity to try and prevent that oil dissipating too far into the sea. But one thing to point out about Jet A1 fuel or kerosene is that it is very, very difficult to see. It will be a sheen-like look on the surface. It won't be, as I mentioned, like crude oil. It won't be thick and black, which could potentially make the cleanup operation fairly difficult.
Thanks to Esme for that. Just a line here from the Cleethorpes Wildlife Rescue Committee. They say they're preparing, in case it is needed, a wildlife rescue team to deal with the fuel spill. In a post online, they said they've met to discuss how best to help wildlife, particularly birds that may reach Cleethorpes Beach. They are adapting their oil spill response protocols. They've set up a dedicated oiled wildlife hotline. There is a number for that, incidentally, if you want it, in Cleethorpes. That's 01472 472 662. So the wildlife organisation's on the lookout. What about the fishing communities? Let's speak to Melanie Owen. She is the MP for Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes. No doubt, Melanie, some great anxiety in your constituency over the fishing grounds just off that coast.
I wouldn't say it's necessarily related to the fishing grounds. I think that there are concerns about the environmental impact. Of course, there's very limited amounts of catching that goes on in this sector. I suspect further along the north coast, around Bridlington, there will be some concern from the inshore fishermen and the inshore fleet that exists about the impact on their catching activities. But I'm sure that first and foremost, everybody's concerns will be with the crew of those vessels and the emergency service operators who have been out to rescue them and continue to do the necessary work to make sure that the vessels are safe and try and limit the amount of damage that occurs as a result of it.
Yeah, we should pay tribute to the rescue organisations, because I know the Coast Guard were on the scene very quickly from those towns that I mentioned at the top of the programme. What assurances are you seeking from the government at this moment in time? Speed clearly is going to be of the essence. Are you confident you're getting everything that you need?
I have to say that the response so far from those in charge locally has been really impressive. The Coast Guard from the four towns, I think it was Mablethorpe, Bridlington, Cleethorpes and one other that escapes my memory at the moment, were on the scene very, very quickly and have taken a lead, and they have worked very, very closely with other emergency services, including the police, including the RNLI, including the ambulance service, working together in a multi-agency approach, using some of the processes that they have as part of the local resilience forum. So they have been able to execute their plans very, very well. These are plans that can apply to different circumstances and different situations. So I'm very, very grateful for the fact that they do seem to have responded remarkably quickly to what is a very rare event. I can't remember a collision like this around the Humber. So I
was going to ask you about that because I was going to ask you about that because it is a dedicated anchorage area, this just outside the estuary. A lot of ships we've seen on our map at the time of the collision this morning, but you say it's a very rare occurrence, that there's never been near misses before?
I'm sure that there will have been near misses. I mean, I think that there are around 34,000 crossings around the Humber on an annual basis. So that is not a small number of vessels. But most of the seafarers are very experienced, very knowledgeable. They understand, the sea currents and how the Humber works. It's a tidal estuary, so they have to wait for high tide to be able to come in and dock. So they're very familiar with that, and the processes generally are very good. So it's not that there won't have been. I'm sure there will have been near misses, but the Coast Guard is generally very good, as well as the other marine operators in making sure that all vessels know where other vessels are at any given time to avoid these sorts of occurrences. So it has come as some surprise to see that this has happened this morning, and it is thankfully rare because we have heard some of the consequences of this collision as the news has started to come out today.
Melanie Owen, really grateful for your time. I know it's a busy period for you. Thank you very much indeed for that. Let's speak to our reporter Rowan Bridge, who is in Grimsby at the moment. I know you've been there about an hour now, just sort of getting reaction to people on the ground. What are you hearing from the port side there?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's very much a sort of closed-off scene here, Christian, at the moment. You may be able to see behind me, the dock behind me has now been closed, and no commercial vessels are going in or out of it. What we have had in the last hour or so is a statement from the owners of one of the vessels involved, the Stena Immaculate, the oil tanker, saying that there were multiple explosions on board the tanker and it is now pouring jet fuel into the sea. It was carrying jet fuel and that is now going into the North Sea off the coast here in East Yorkshire. The Coast Guard say they are now assessing what pollution response might be needed. We've also had a statement from one of the local MPs here in East Yorkshire, the Beverley and Holderness MP, Graham Stewart. He has said within the past hour that he has spoken with the Transport Secretary, Heidi Alexander, and that only one person at the moment is in hospital, and the 36 other mariners across both crews are safe and accounted for. We also know that the Marine Accident Investigation Branch has investigators down here in Grimsby, and they are currently starting their investigation into how this could have happened and what was the cause behind it.
Have we had any comment from the operator of the Portuguese flagged container ship, because that also set on fire? So there are question marks about what the container ship was carrying, and also seemingly that was the ship that was underway. Rowan, why did they not see the oil tanker in front of them?
Yes, I mean, I think there will be questions about what were conditions like out at sea this morning when this happened. But as you say, this happened during daylight, and the Stena Immaculate was anchored off the coast of Hull. It had travelled from Greece up to Hull and was anchored in position, and it appears to have then been struck, as you say, by the Salong. Now, we have not yet, as far as I have seen, had any comment from the Salong's owners. It is a Portuguese flagged container ship, but at the moment I've not seen any statements from its owners in response to what has happened here during the day today.
Rowan Bridge, thank you very much. There is a live page on the BBC website which you should take a look at. Lots of breaking news lines on that story there. We'll keep you up to date, of course, with any developments from that area in Yorkshire where that operation continues. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Just a line of breaking news to bring you that we've just received from Downing Street. We're being told by the Prime Minister's spokesman that Sir Keir Starmer spoke with Donald Trump about the situation in Ukraine ahead of that meeting that begins tomorrow in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. The two leaders talked about the economic deal. They've also talked about the path to peace. Busy week coming up for Sir Keir Starmer on this issue. He's due to host leaders again to talk about the coalition of the willing. There's a meeting in Paris tomorrow of military leaders to find out which countries are prepared to commit troops to any future peacekeeping effort. We've heard from the American side also today that there's still some work to be done on the minerals deal. There you see President Zelensky arriving in Jeddah for talks today with the Crown Prince, who will play a part, no doubt, in these discussions. So still some work to do on the minerals deal. On the other side, the UK government sent Jonathan Powell, the National Security Advisor, here to Kyiv over the weekend to advise the Ukrainians on the negotiation. Clearly, they don't want to repeat of what happened in Washington just the other week. And so the communication, the strategy, or the strategizing around this deal is very much a work in progress. And President Zelensky has been involved in those discussions, although he won't, we're told, be part of the talks tomorrow. They will leave that to the technical teams. Let's talk about the situation in Canada. A country which will never, ever be part of the United States. Those were the words of the country's incoming Prime Minister Mark Carney, who last night won a landslide victory to succeed Justin Trudeau. Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, says the gloves are coming off in the trade war with the United States. He's never been elected an MP before, never served in a cabinet post, but he received 85% of the vote of his party to become the new leader of the Liberals. And in his speech accepting the leadership, he said he would ensure going forward that the party continued to stand for fiscal responsibility, social justice and international leadership. Let's get a view then of what the Liberals might have planned in the months ahead. We can speak to Jonathan Callis. He's the former advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Good to have you with us on the programme. Actually, when you look at the polling and the way in which the Liberals have closed the gap in recent months, Mark Carney has a pretty good shot of staying in post and winning an election. The question is, when does he call the election?
I suspect the election will be called sometime in the next 2 weeks. The schedule is sort of tight for a couple of reasons. One, Parliament is currently prorogued, and the prorogation is set to end on the 24th, so in 2 weeks from today. And it's a minority government, so it's unlikely that Mr. Carney would survive a confidence vote on a throne speech. He'd probably want to set the agenda and go straight to an election before that were to happen. The other thing is that the Conservatives have a huge advantage in terms of fundraising over the last few years and have a really big war chest. And campaign finance rules limit how much money can be spent during a campaign, but there aren't many limits before the campaign starts. So they've been blasting the airways with lots of TV advertisements, already trying to attack Mark Carney, and he would like to even the playing field as soon as possible.
Do you think Donald Trump's populist message is making things harder for the Conservatives?
I think it's partially the populist message and part of the liberal ads that you're seeing and what you're hearing in speeches from both Prime Minister Trudeau and incoming Prime Minister Mark Carney is connecting Pierre Poilievre, who's the leader of the opposition, the Conservative leader, to Donald Trump, saying they have similar styles, similar policies, and trying to connect them and, paint Pierre Poilievre with the negative opinions that Donald Trump is getting across Canada. And the other thing is that the tariff threats that are coming from the U.S. and some of the tariffs that have already been imposed, that is scaring a lot of Canadian voters. It's a real threat to the economy here. And the argument is that Pierre Poilievre just isn't up to the job when, he has so much in common with Donald Trump.
Yeah, interesting. According to this poll from Angus Reid, 43% of respondents said they trusted Carney the most to deal with Donald Trump. 34% chose Poilievre. The gloves are indeed coming off. We've just heard in the last hour from Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, who said that he's slapping these 25% surcharges on electricity. Is there any anxiety in Canada that might anger Donald Trump, that might lead to further repercussions?
I think what you're getting the sense from most Canadians is they are happy that the governments, both federally and provincially, are all standing strong, taking strong stances, making it very clear that the tariffs are unacceptable, will hurt American consumers, American businesses, American workers, and that Canada is going to make sure that either reciprocal tariffs from Canada or other measures will make it even more painful to Americans. And hopefully that kind of pressure and angst that Americans will start to feel will trickle down to Donald Trump, and he will back down from some of these completely unjustified tariffs.
We're also watching today the events at Westminster Abbey. It's Commonwealth Day. Of course, Canada, a key part of the Commonwealth. He's saying that countries need to pull together. There needs to be more unity in the face of what is a very unstable international situation. Do you get a sense there that the ties between the UK and Canada are being looked at again? And now that you have a former governor of the Bank of England in place, is a bigger, fatter trade deal a possibility?
I think there's definitely an opportunity for that. And, Canada had signed a free trade agreement with the European Union before Brexit. And since then, Canada and the UK have been trying to negotiate a new free trade agreement. There have been some issues that are holding that up. I'm hopeful that now in the current context, there'll be a lot more incentive for both parties to make some compromises and get something done in the short term. That would be, I think, beneficial to both countries, again, especially in the context of tariffs on Canada right now. But I think there's a decent chance you'll see additional tariffs on Europe, on UK, and everywhere else.
The King in vision at the moment, we're just watching him going into the Abbey a little earlier. I mean, he did host Justin Trudeau just the other day. He is the head of state of Canada. Has there been any sort of response from the palace or anything reported in Canada as to how the King sees it and his response and his reaction to what Donald Trump has been saying about Canada becoming the 51st state?
I don't know what happened in those private conversations, but it's been noticed that that he really said nothing at all. That's, I think, upset a few people, but I think most Canadians still understand that the role that he plays is not to get involved in those kinds of day-to-day political situations. Obviously, when Canada's sovereignty is potentially being threatened, maybe that'll change. But so far, we haven't heard anything.
But that's the extraordinary thing about this, isn't it? That your former boss, Justin Trudeau, paints this as truly an existential threat, that this will be a campaign about sovereignty and not necessarily about the economy, which it would have been perhaps 3 months ago. It's extraordinary that a country like Canada, an advanced economy, sees this as an existential threat.
Well, I mean, at some point, you have to take President Trump at his word. It may change frequently, sometimes within an hour or a day, but he has referred to Canada as the 51st state any number of times. He has talked about how it would be better for Canada and Canadians if we joined the United States. There's very little interest by Canadians to do so. You hear a couple of voices, but you could probably count the number on your hand. Most Canadians are strongly opposed, but that rhetoric continues. We understand from the conversation that the president had with Prime Minister Trudeau last week, he talked about the actual border and treaties that were signed over 120 years ago and had those open the door to renegotiating the borders and potentially the existence of really two separate countries. It seems a little preposterous, but if it keeps getting brought up every single time that Donald Trump talks about Canada, at some point we're going to react and we're going to start getting concerned. In fact, I think we're already there. I don't think we're about to be invaded tomorrow, but that's one of the major things we're talking about. And I think a lot of that is bluster, but I think some of that is very much about natural resources, minerals,
the minerals,
critical earth, water.
Yeah, it's always about the minerals. It is always about the minerals. We'll have to cut you there. Jonathan Kellis, thank you very much for that. Just a quick line to tell you before we go to the break. 6,500 jobs to go at NHS England as part of the government's restructuring plans. We'll tell you more about that in the coming minutes. Do stay with us.